talk, talking crime, cases, and backing the blue. Now, here are your hosts, Captain Ed Mamet and Detective Kevin Schroeder.
Good afternoon, WABC listeners and YouTube viewers. Here we are again with another podcast. This time we have a sit-in for your favorite co-host, Kevin Schroeder, retired detective. And as, of course, you know, I'm his co-host, retired Captain Ed Mamet. And filling in for Kevin is a retired New York City Police Department sergeant. His name is Pete Panuccio. Say hello, Pete.
Good afternoon, everyone. Pleasure to be here.
So, Maud, you're running for the Republican Party on the for the Manhattan DA's office. Can you tell us a little about yourself, your background, before we get into the nitty-gritty of your run?
Sure, absolutely. Well, first of all, thanks very much for having me. And so your viewers know I messed up. I was supposed to be there in person with you, and I'm very bummed out. I thought this was a Zoom filming, but I hope we'll get a chance to speak again in the future, and maybe we can do it in person, which would be ideal, because I love to get off Zoom and be in person. It's always really nice. I have a sort of unusual path to running for Manhattan District Attorney in that my experience in the criminal courts was as a public defender, as a defense attorney. I worked at the Legal Aid Society in Manhattan, in the Bronx, working in the courts as a trial attorney, working as a trial trainer, and working as their director of training new young public defenders on how to do the job. I'm also known to anyone who reads the New York Post as a public school mom who stands up for public school kids about all sorts of issues. One, just straight up education. Our schools should do a better job educating our kids, but we also had to fight for our kids to get our schools open during COVID, to make sure that they didn't have to wear masks and get vaccinated just to play sports once all the other schools and everything were getting back to normal. New York City kids were still under all sorts of restrictions, and fighting to sort of get our kids back to normalcy was really important. And as of late, I've had to stand up for my fellow New Yorkers dealing with the anti-Semitism that roared into our city after October 7th, and just standing up for good common sense values, which of course means standing up for public safety. I ran for city council back in 21 and was one of the few Democrats who said defund the police is nonsense. We shouldn't do it. It's going to make our city less safe. I was one of the few who said we should not close Rikers Island. I've been to Rikers Island many times. I certainly know we cannot afford to have Bill de Blasio's lunatic community jail plan with, a fraction of the beds we need if we're actually policing the city correctly. So I like to think of myself as a common sense New Yorker who's running to restore public safety in our city because someone's got to do it.
Now, you live in Lower Manhattan, am I correct?
I do. I do.
You live in Soho? Or?
Indeed.
And you're a native New Yorker?
I am born in New York. I was born in Lenox Hill Hospital on the Upper East Side, but I grew up mostly in Pennsylvania. Moved out of New York when I was very little, came back to New York City to go to college, and that was a long time ago, but I've been here ever since.
What I found fascinating is you were originally a Democrat.
Indeed. But how fascinating is that? Most people who live in Manhattan are Democrats.
No, and then you change over to be a Republican.
I think there are a lot of uncaptured by the data Democrats who are basically Republicans in their heart now. There's still more Democrats, but there are my 1990s Democrat issues are now what center-right people are talking about and caring about, right? The Democratic Party, I always quote Ronald Reagan, who said, I didn't leave the Democratic Party left me. I think that's true of me and lots of New Yorkers, in particular in Manhattan right now. Because when I talk to people, they say to me, and they get to know what I'm running for. They're like, Maud, you're great. Like, why didn't you run as a Democrat? And I say, I did. Like, I ran in 21 and 22 as a Democrat. And the Democratic primary voters are going further and further left and further radical. They want more and more radical ideas. So if you just stay in the common sense middle where I've been for, most of my adult life, you become a Republican because, public safety is not like an issue that's up for debate. Alvin Bragg's day one memo saying we're not going to prosecute resisting arrest. We're not going to prosecute fair beat. We're going to pretend like armed robbery is a misdemeanor so long as nobody gets shot in the face. What is that? It's like he didn't get the memo about what his job actually is. If you're the chief prosecutor in a city, you have to prosecute crime, not excuse crime. And that's what Alvin Bragg has been up to.
As a fellow Manhattan resident and watching the quality of life plummet, Alvin Bragg told us who he was before the last election.
He sure did.
You couldn't scream it loud enough from the rooftops. Look at his day one memo.
Mm-hmm.
I looked at it and I said, this is absolute, utter insanity. He pretty much de facto legalized people carrying firearms. And I said, this is insane. Absolutely insane. And then, of course, you get into the verbiage that he uses. Decarceration, decarceral. And I'm like, this guy's out of his mind. Right now, I'm a Midtown guy, and it's not safe anymore. It's as bad as things got in the lead up to 2020. And we might not have the actual number of crimes that we had, say, 30 years ago, but the quality of life, and I call it palpable fear. Mm-hmm. The fear that people feel when they walk out on the street, you just have this sense of unease, you're surrounded by disorder, and you feel unsafe. Mm-hmm. So I don't let my wife, if she's got to go somewhere at night, if she's going out with her friends, I take her there, I pick her up. I just, not at this stage of the game now.
What? Look, a lot of New Yorkers who know what you're talking about, because we're being gaslit all the time about how it's safe. And I'll give credit where credit is due. I think Police Commissioner Tisch is doing a good job in some ways that, are creating some improvements. But if you can get in a time machine and go back 5 years or go back 10 years, like, it was a safer city. It's just not anymore. Not on the subways, not walking down the street. I have 4 kids and I have teenagers. So, like, my kids want to come home later at night. And now, they're older, they're on their own, they're going out with their friends, but they're still kids. And it's like, it's nerve-wracking to have family members get on the subway late at night because it's a more lawless city because of Alvin Bragg.
Absolutely.
What would you do if you were the DA to counter his policies?
What would I do?
Yes.
Well, that starts with revoking the day one memo, right? The day one memo was so bad when it came out that he did a little walk back sort of kind of in the press. But in reality, if you talk to crime victims, you know that there are serious felony assaults that are being downgraded to misdemeanors. Those misdemeanors don't get prosecuted. Something like 70% of misdemeanors are being dismissed out of that office. And the ones that do get prosecuted, they're being dismissed with like violations and wrapped up with violations, the plea bargains. So I would go back to a system where the Manhattan DA's office prosecuted offenders. And I know that sounds simplistic, but it really is simplistic. There's not some magical thing we have to do to make New York safer again. We have to do the job of the prosecutor's office in the prosecutor's office. Most of the years that I litigated cases in 100 Center Street was when District Attorney Morgenthau was there. And that office, I know it well because I litigated against it for many years. Charged felonies as felonies, and gun cases were prosecuted. In Alvin Bragg's New York, it's a system where the district attorneys prosecute as low, and they plea bargain and they dismiss and they bring cases down to the lowest possible offense they can do legally. And I'll tell you, we were just talking about where we lived. I lived downtown. In Washington Square Park, the drug dealing has gotten out of control. And in the last few weeks, they have the 6th precinct is doing a great job. They are arresting people. They are out there. They are trying, and they are meeting with the community and trying. But what they get is good arrests with good evidence, properly done arrests that go to the district attorney's office, go to ECAB, and they don't ask for bail, even on the cases that are bail eligible. And in the last 2 weeks, they've had 2 separate cases where one was a guy who was on lifetime parole with a manslaughter conviction on his rap sheet. and no bail, no parole hold, no second call to check with parole if there was a hold coming or if they could hold the guy. And he was back out on the street dealing drugs again in Washington Square Park the next day. Then they had another guy with a murder conviction that was arrested, proper arrest, and he was out again the very next day. And, the residents that are trying to understand what's going on and why their communities and why their streets and why their parks are filled with criminals, the answer is kind of simple. It's because Alvin Bragg is the one not prosecuting in Manhattan.
You mentioned ECAB. Can you explain to our listeners and viewers what that means? I know what it means, but we have people that are not in the police world that listen.
No, there's always acronyms and everywhere. So ECAB stands for Early Case Assessment Bureau. So when you have the cops out on the street doing their job, making arrests, collecting the evidence, doing everything right, the next thing that happens is they hand it off to the prosecutors, who then have to write up the complaint, right? And that person who's been arrested, brought to a precinct, and then brought down to, in Manhattan, brought down to 100 Center Street for arraignment, which is when the judge, sets bail or doesn't set bail. And before that, they meet your defense lawyer, usually a public defender, but could be a private attorney. And in the past, most cases that are... In the past, common sense could tell you who was going to have bail set on them. Someone with a long rap sheet, someone with a violent case, you don't have to be a lawyer to know that the guy with the open container of alcohol and who got a desk appearance ticket and had an outstanding warrant for not doing their community service or something, maybe that guy was going to be released on his own recognizance. But the guy on lifetime parole with the manslaughter conviction who's dealing drugs in the park should have bail set on him. And in the old days, he would have. And he doesn't now. Now, let me just be really fair about one thing. A huge part of this is Alvin Bragg's fault, but not all of it. Some of it is the changes that were made in Albany, bail reform, raised the age, less is more, discovery changes. There was a whole slew of laws that made it harder to prosecute crimes, but not impossible. There are still DAs out there that are doing their job and actually doing the job well, and Alvin Bragg is not one of them. But we do need changes in Albany, and Police Commissioner Tisch has said we need a course correction in order to fix things. And I know we're here to talk about my race, but we have a mayor's race coming up too, and I'm very fearful that we're not going to get any movement or changes in Albany if we elect people who call themselves socialists but propose ideas that look like communists in Gracie Mansion. So that's a whole nother thing to worry about. I'll try to just stay focused on worrying about the Manhattan DA's race for now.
Yeah, it just isn't a quick aside. In 2020, when the changes took effect, January 1st, 6 precinct guys lock up a guy. He's charged with 16 commercial burglaries. Mm-hmm. All right, that's a substantial number. Had he been arrested in December, this guy would have been buried. Out the Rikers, that's it.
Right.
The next night, I'm at work. I was the midnight sergeant in Manhattan. Lieutenant from the 6th Precinct calls me up. He goes, maybe it's my phone. My police department phone's not working. Maybe I've lost my mind. Could you do me a favor and run this guy and see where he is in the system? Mm-hmm. And I says, your guy is out. He was out as of 7:30 tonight. And he's like, he is literally back on one of his favorite blocks, wearing the same clothes. Mm-hmm. I said, that is absolutely insane. With that
arrest. I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, his arrest was a minor inconvenience to him in his law breaking, right? Like he was committing burglary. He got arrested and inconvenienced with some hours in a jail cell, and then he got out and he went right back to committing burglary. And that recidivism that we see is not just burglars, it's across a whole range of crimes in our city. And when you change the laws to benefit the lawbreakers and not the law followers, that's what you get. You get more crime by a core group of people. One thing that I always say to folks is that most of the people who live in Manhattan don't break the law. Most of us pay for our toothpaste. Most of us don't go into other people's cars and homes and steal things, right? Like most of us don't commit robbery or rape or arson. It is a relatively small group of people. And Manhattan's a big city, Manhattan's a big borough. New York City is a good city. We have thousands of people who need to be arrested and locked up. But that's a relatively small number compared to how many millions of us live here. And what that change in law did, along with electing quote unquote progressive prosecutors like Alvin Bragg, who implement the George Soros idea of criminal justice, what it did is make sure that those recidivist criminals are out as fast as possible back on the street to commit more crimes.
What's your position on defunding the police?
It's moronic. And you can change the name of it. Justice informed policing, social workers. Someone dug up this clip of Zoran Mamdani saying that you shouldn't send, what did he say? You shouldn't send cops to, one was a DV call and there was something else. I forget the other thing, but basically cops shouldn't go to domestic violence calls. I mean, that's a recipe to get women killed. So I just think it's insane. But that's another one of those things that that has nothing to do with being a Democrat or a Republican. I sought the PBA endorsement, the Patrolmen Benevolent Association, which is the union of the cops, uniformed cops that you see on the street. I'm sure people listening to your show know that, but I'll just say it in case anyone doesn't. I sought that endorsement and got that endorsement in 2021 when I was running as a Democrat. And I'm seeking it again now because I know perfectly well, whether you're running for city council or running for Manhattan DA, we have to work with the police, which doesn't mean that someone doesn't have a valid, complaint or criticism of law enforcement. And you can try to make changes through the political process if you think something's not working. But there's no way you can have a safe city unless you have the sort of high functioning, excellent police force that New York City has been lucky to have for many, many years. And if you've traveled internationally, if you've gone anywhere, people don't even realize how lucky we are with the police department that we have. So I think defund the police is insane. In fact, and I say this a lot, but if you go, I moved back into New York in the late 80s to go to college. And, that was a time where the crime rates, the stats in the early 90s, homicide was a much bigger problem. All homicide is a problem, but the numbers were really worse than they are now. It was the Congressional Black Caucus and Black leaders in our city that were pushing really hard to add more police to the streets. And it was, Bill Clinton and David Dinkins and then Giuliani coming in after him that put thousands more cops on the street. And the reduction in crime and the better quality of life for everybody who lived in New York was in very large part due to an increase in police officers and data-driven, focused policing, smart, targeted policing that came into our city and made us all safe. So safe that people forgot about the bad old days and are now implementing these silly policies that are making us significantly less safe.
What would be the most important thing that you would do as DA? What do you consider the most important thing?
There's so many, but I think really, as I said before, it's that the prosecutor has to be loyal to the crime victims first, not the criminals first. You have to say this person who has been assaulted, who's been hurt, who's been robbed, their home or store has been burglarized, that person has to be your priority. And that means you have to prosecute to the fullest extent of the law. So you have to say, and you have to also understand how the criminal justice system works. The reason you don't start off with the lowest offense possible is because most of our cases don't go to trial. Most of the cases are plea bargains. You write up cases, and as a former defense lawyer, I saw this where I'm like, well, that's crazy. That's too high of a charge, or that's too, but you do that as a prosecutor because you have to bargain, right? And you ultimately charge the case that the facts support, the charges that the facts support. And we have to go back to having a district attorney's office where the ADAs, the assistant district attorneys, are figuring out and pursuing how to prosecute to the fullest extent of the law, because that's the law. That's what you're supposed to be doing, not figuring out ways. We have prosecutors who are acting like defense lawyers, trying to figure out how to help the criminal out and get the lowest possible offense charge. So the thing that I would change is to prosecute according to the law and not according to Alvin Bragg's pro-criminal ideology.
Very good. Now, if people want to contribute to your campaign, how do they do that?
please do that. And you can go to maudformanhattan.com and click on that donate button. It's Maud, MAUD, the letter 4, FOR, Manhattan. And that'll get you there. And we take checks and credit cards. So you can click on that and send it to us. It really helps. And I will say this, we've raised almost $400,000 to date, which is not enough to have the same kind of money that Alvin Bragg has, but it's 3 times as much as Thomas Caniff, who was a fantastic candidate 4 years ago, was able to raise. So I think that more and more people are waking up to the fact that we need public safety in Manhattan.
Well, we wish you the best of luck, and we'll be watching you, and perhaps you'll be on the show again.
I would love to.
And,
thank you so much, guys.
And for all you YouTube viewers and WABC listeners, God bless everybody, as Kevin would say. And if you want to contribute to Maud, that would be a very nice thing to do. Thank you, Maud.